What's up, Globies? In today's video, we will be discussing Chapter 5, which is the world of regions. In our increasingly globalized world, regional organizations and networks have emerged as a way to respond to the challenges of international cooperation and development. Globalization has heightened awareness of the differences and inequalities that exist among nations. And one of the most significant of this is what we call the North and South divide. The North and South divide refers to the socio-economic and political gap between the wealthier industrialized nation of the global North and the less developed, often marginalized nations of the global South. This divide is not only about economic prosperity, it is also about the disparities in power, access to resources, technology, health, and opportunities. But before we dive into that, let us discuss a few relevant ideas or topics that will help us better understand the global North and South divide. So keep your ears open and be ready to listen.
So let us start first with the discussion on what really is the connection of countries, regions, and globalizations. So regions can be seen as clusters of countries situated in a specific geographic area or as combinations of two or more regions orchestrated to govern and supervise flows and policies decision. So basically, regionalism, it refers to the tendency or it refers to the ties, alliances of countries within a specific geographic area. So, yung mga countries na to, they are forming alliances or like they're making agreements or building organization to help them strengthen their economic, political, and cultural ties. It is also a way of balancing globalization for them. Kasi we all know na globalization, it is the integration of the whole world. So, globalization, it is like lahat na yan buong-buo na yan But regionalism allows countries to cooperate more closely to their neighboring states. It is also the idea kasi na instead of focusing only on the entire world as one, para siyang nagiging overwhelming, especially for those smaller countries. So, mas inaano nila na mag-work together muna with those countries na they are closer. Kasi they share the common interests, they lie at the same geography, and malaki rin yung possibility na mas connected or closer yung culture or history nila. Para siyang sinasabi na, oo naman, kasama pa rin kami sa globalization. We will still join the global world. But first, we need to strengthen our ties with our neighbors. So, regionalization involves the concentration of economic activities within a specific region. Conversely, regionalism is a political phenomenon characterized by cooperative economic policies and coordination among nations. So, given na yan, hindi lang naman trabaho ng isang bansa na papasok sa ganitong agreement, i-involve yung sarili nila sa regionalization na hindi sila mag-work or anything. Of course, they need to cooperate. They have their own duties and responsibilities to actually make the agreement or the tie work.
Regions can be seen as clusters of countries in a specific geographic area, or even as combinations of two or more regions that coordinate policies and oversee the flow of goods, services, and ideas. These regional groupings exist because globalization poses both opportunities and challenges, and countries often realize that working together gives them greater stability and influence. Different nations, however, respond to globalization in diverse ways depending on their size, resources, and geographic position. For example, China has used its massive workforce as an advantage, attracting foreign investments and building stronger trade ties, even with former adversaries like the United States and Japan. This shows how a large country can turn its population into an economic strength to boost its global position. On the other hand, smaller countries with limited natural resources, such as Singapore and Switzerland, have relied on their strategic locations. By developing strong financial and banking sectors, they transformed themselves into global hubs, proving that even nations without vast resources can thrive in a globalized economy through specialization and innovation. In this way, both regional cooperation and individual strategies demonstrate how countries navigate globalization, either by pooling efforts with their neighbors or by maximizing their unique strengths.
So, why do countries even do this? Why do we even form alliances? Why do we need to do this? Why countries come together to form regional alliances? So, bakit nga ba? There are actually various purposes bakit to ginagawa. But the first is, it is to enhance the military defense. Kasi forming regional alliances enhances military defense kasi it allows countries within the same region to combine the resources, mag-coordinate ng strategies, and i-support yung each others in times of war or conflict. Kasi magiging collective security na yan. Yung saying na an attack on one can be treated as an attack on all. Applicable na yan if meron ng alliance na na-form. And another thing, yung sa may resource sharing, yung mga countries, they can actually share their intelligence, their technologies, yung trainings nila, yung equipments, and yung bases nila, and everything. Tapos magkakaroon din ng stronger defense for the countries involved. Magiging maayos na respond din siya pagdating sa mga conflicts. Kasi nga, isang advantage na yung geographically close yung regions na to. So, it would be easier for them to actually address wars face wars or conflicts since they are geographically closer to each other. So, hindi naman siya exactly a regional alliance, but EDCA, it is close to that. Kasi, diba, we have this cooperation agreement, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with America, Philippines, and United States. Para siyang regionalism. So, nagiging joint training, disaster response. Para, basically, bilateral defense agreement lang naman siya. So, hindi talaga siya example ng regional alliances. Pero, gusto ko lang siyang i-note kasi isa siyang example ng enhancement of military defense. So, ang actual example of this is yung regional alliances ng NATO or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It is a military alliance that was formed way back 1949 by United States. So, by United States, Canada, and several European countries after the World War II. NATO were established during the Cold War to safeguard Western European countries and the United States against the Soviet Union's threat. In response, the Soviet Union formed an alliance known as the Warsaw Pact, which consisted of Eastern European nations under Soviet influence. While Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, wala na tong Soviet Union na to. NATO continued to exist until now. Another thing is, forming regional alliances is closely connected to economic cooperation and leverage because inaalaw nito yung neighboring countries to actually, to actually share or pagsamahin yung resources nila. It helps them strengthen their trades and nakakatulong rin ito mag-gain ng greater bargaining power sa global economy. So, regional alliances connect economies. Nag-create siya ng nagbigay siya ng bigger opportunities sa mga countries. Nag-create din siya ng bigger markets and nagkakaroon ng economic stability kasi regional cooperation, it actually helps members support each other in times of financial crisis through shared funds and policies. Another thing, yung sinabi ko nga kanina, nag-create siya ng bigger markets kasi yung mga businesses, they can gain access not only to their home countries but to the entire regional market, boosting growth and innovation. So, in short, regional alliances connects economies and gives countries a stronger leverage in dealing with the global economy than if they acted alone.
Have you ever wondered why it's so important for a country to stay independent and not be controlled by powerful nations? Think about it. If another country dictated our decisions, would we truly be free? This is exactly what the Non-Aligned Movement, or NAM, sought to address. NAM was founded in 1961 by the leaders of Egypt, Ghana, India, Indonesia, and Yugoslavia. Its main purpose was to promote peace, human rights, national sovereignty, and non-intervention. What made NAM unique was its decision to stay neutral during the Cold War, a time where the world was divided between Western capitalist countries and Eastern communist states. Because of this neutrality, NAM became one of the largest groups of countries outside the superpower blocs. At its peak, it attracted up to 120 member nations. This showed that many countries, especially those newly independent from colonial rule, wanted to prove that they could stand on their own without being pressured into choosing sides. Now, preserving independence from superpower influence means making sure our decisions as a nation are guided by our own needs, interests, not dictated by stronger countries. It's about protecting our sovereignty, maintaining fair and balanced relations with other nations, and avoiding overdependence on just one power. In other words, it's about being free to choose what's best for us while still being a part of a global community. Even today, we see how important this is. Smaller countries are often caught in between conflicts of larger powers, whether it's in trade, security, or politics. By learning from the Non-Aligned Movement, we can understand why it matters to protect our independence, because it allows us to make choices that truly reflect our people's needs, instead of just serving for the interest of others. So, the question we need to ask ourselves is this: how can we continue practicing this independence in today's world? And what role can each of us play in protecting our country's sovereignty? Addressing economic crisis. You may be wondering, what does this mean? To simply put, it means how nations respond and work together when their economies face sudden collapse. A strong example of this is the Asian financial crisis of 1997. This crisis began in Thailand when currency speculators and international banking pressures caused its economy to collapse. The effects spread quickly to other Asian countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and South Korea. Businesses closed down, millions lost their jobs, and poverty rose sharply. It became one of the most devastating financial events in modern Asian history. In response, ASEAN countries along with China, Japan, and South Korea established an emergency fund to stabilize their economies. This action was not only financial support, it was also a show of solidarity. It proved that Asian nations could set aside differences and work together in times of need. The Asian financial crisis highlighted that no single country can withstand large-scale economic shocks alone. It pushed the region toward deeper cooperation, strengthening ASEAN's unity and coordination. By acting collectively, they restored confidence and prevented the crisis from getting worse. In conclusion, addressing economic crisis is not just solving financial problems. It is about cooperation, solidarity, and resilience. The 1997 crisis proved that regional unity can turn hardship into strength, and it remains a reminder that countries are stronger when they face challenges together.
What is non-state regionalism? So essentially, non-state regionalism or new regionalism is when people get together to work on a regional level, but they do it outside the usual state players such as national governments. It's a departure from the old model of working where only nations could create influential alliances and unions. So today, we have things like non-governmental organizations, NGOs, activist groups, and even average citizens networking to tackle issues they are passionate about. Like a set of green campaigners across various Southeast Asian nations that are all worried about the clearance of forests. Rather than expecting their government to intervene, they exchange information, network, and coordinate their action to save the rainforest. That is the highest form of non-state regionalism in action. So now, how non-state regionalism works in real world? In other instances, these organizations are more activist in approach. For example, organizations in Latin America have specifically criticized trade agreements such as NAFTA on the grounds that they are detrimental to local population. Other organizations such as the Rainforest Foundation approach issues very narrowly, directly collaborating with local communities to preserve their homes and way of life. Although they have extensive moral authority and passion, they encounter substantial challenges. 1. They tend to have limited budgets that hinder their visibility. 2. They also have internal differences of self regarding contentious topics, that is, such as religious freedom or gender equality. So we're gonna talk about 3 key characteristics of non-state regionalism. So first is diverse structures. It's not all big, formal organizations. The group can be small, informal networks dealing with a single cause, such as a network working for clean water, to large, more formalized coalitions that act on a variety of issues, from human rights to trade. Second is involvement of non-state actors. This is the most important aspect. It's not government discussing among themselves. It's an arena where NGOs, civil society organizations, professional organizations, and even individuals can all contribute and collaborate towards common objectives. Lastly is the reformist approach. It contrasts to classic regionalism, which tended to emphasize economic or security cooperation between the states. New regionalism tends to have a social or moral agenda. It aims to reform the current systems and strive for transformation. It perceives issues such as poverty or environmental degradation not merely as a single issues, but as something systematically wrong that requires an alternative approach. So these non-state actors exert influence through different tactics. Some collaborate with governments as legitimizers, affecting policy from within. A good example of this is the manner in which civil society groups from Southeast Asia utilize the ASEAN's Human Rights Declaration in order to exert pressure on human rights reforms in their respective countries. So that's how the 3 key characteristic works.
Okay, so now let us proceed to the contemporary challenges to realism. But before we proceed on to that, I have a question for you. So, what do you think, or what are the contemporary challenges to regionalism? If you would just think, isip ka lang kung ano yung first thing na pumasok sa mind mo. I will give you 5 seconds to do that. Okay, so now we will find out what are the contemporary challenges to regionalism. The first challenges into contemporary regionalism is the resurgence of militant nationalism and populism. So, regionalism thrives when countries cooperate and accept that sometimes they need to give up a bit of sovereignty for the collective good. Pero ngayon, nationalism and populism are making this harder. So, ano nga ba yung nationalism? Nationalism is when putting the nation's interests above everything else. This sounds good locally, but it weakens regional unity. So, populism naman is the leaders present themselves as champions of the people, often blaming outside forces like immigrants, regional organizations, or even foreign countries for local problems. So, when you combine the militant nationalism and populism, this creates now a suspicion and distrust inside regions. A good example for this is the Russia, wherein Putin, we all know naman who Putin is, which he uses strong nationalist rhetoric, accusing the NATO and the EU of threatening Russian sovereignty. Instead of cooperation, Russia uses military action like the invasion of Ukraine and which now destabilizes the Europe and divides regional institution. So, in Tagalog, to make it more understandable, kapag leaders put nationalism above cooperation, nawawala yung trust. Ang dating na lang now is kanya-kanya instead of sama-sama. So in short, resurgence of militant nationalism and populism pull countries away from collective goals. So now let us proceed to the next contemporary challenge to regionalism, which is the anti-immigrant sentiment and populist backlash. So this means that many regions struggle with migration, whether it's economic migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers. Populist leaders amplify fears, saying immigrants steal jobs, change culture, or cause insecurity. This creates backlash that disrupts regional unity. So bakit nga ba ito naging challenge? Regionalism often requires shared responsibility, burden sharing, sabi nila. Pero kapag maraming bansa ang tumanggi sa immigrants, nagkakaroon now ng what we call division. Instead of solidarity, states compete to protect their borders. A good example for this is the Brexit, which is the UK leaving the EU. One of the biggest reasons for Brexit was immigration. British citizens were angry at EU's open border policy. Freedom of movement, sabi nga nila. Feeling overwhelmed by European migrants and Middle Eastern refugees. So in short, sa halip na magtulungan sila para masolusyonan ng refugee at migration crisis, mas pinipili now ng mga bansa na isara ang kanilang borders. So now, the anti-immigrant sentiment fuels division inside regional organizations, making it more harder to build a collective solutions. And definitely not the least, the last contemporary challenge to regionalism is the differing visions of regionalism's purpose. This means that not all countries agree on what regionalism should achieve. For some, it's about democracy and political integration. And for others naman, it's about economic cooperation and stability. These different priorities now creates a friction. So, bakit nga ba ito naging challenge? Why it is a challenge to contemporary regionalism? Kasi, without a shared vision, regional organizations cannot move forward with clear goals. Ang ending, Puro compromises, mabagal ang decision making, at minsan walang progress. A good example for this one is the Western nations. They often see regionalism as a way to promote democracy, human rights, and deeper integration. It's like having a shared parliament, currency, and laws. So, now, pag sinabi nating differing visions of regionalism's purpose, iba-iba yung vision ng bawat bansa tungkol sa regionalism. May nakatutok sa democracy, while yung iba naman is meron ding nakatutok sa economy. Kaya mahirap makakabuo ng iisang direction or path or goal. So, in short, differing visions of regionalism purpose can cross fragmentation now, making it harder to achieve true unity. So, 'di ba? It's really hard to build unity if iba-iba naman yung perspective, 'di ba? So these challenges only shows that regionalism today is very challenging kasi hindi lahat ng bansa is pare-pareho ng priorities. Kagaya mo lang din yan. May iba kang priority, may iba siyang priority, kaya hindi kanya pinili. So, hindi lahat ng bansa ay pare-pareho ng priorities and values and willingness na mag-sacrifice. Kaya naman, kung walang compromise, madalas na uuwi to sa conflicts, disunity, and mabagal na decision makings. So, to make it short, kapag sinabing resurgence of militant nationalism and populism, inuuna nila yung sarili nila, which is nawawala na yung unity. Wow, sana all inauna yung sarili. Next is anti-immigrant sentiment. Dito naman is populist backlash divides the region. So, dahil sa backlash, nadi-divide now yung regions. The last one is the differing visions, which only means na iba-iba ang goals, kaya hirap magkaisa. So, these are the 3 contemporary challenges to regionalism.
Alright, now we will discuss the North and South divide. I think Sir Ken already mentioned this in our past discussions, but let me ask you first. If you think of one developed or developing country you would like to live in, what country would that be? I'll give you 5 seconds to think. A country that is developed or developing country would like to live in. Okay, if you thought of countries like Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, Canada, or France, I understand why you chose them. Now, bakit ko nga ba tinanong yon? Ano nga ba ang connect ng mga bansang nabanggit natin sa topic na ito? Because little did we know, these countries actually fall now under what we call North and South divide. The global North includes developed and industrialized countries, while the global South refers to underdeveloped and economically disadvantaged nations. That's why this topic is important. The North-South divide is a key framework for understanding global inequalities. And take note, this divide is not only based on geography, but also evident on socio-economic and political differences that affects us all. Now, let's discuss about the Brandt line. The Brandt line is the line popularized by Brandt Commission in the 1980s that serves now as a visual aid of what really this division looks like. And mapapansin natin na hindi absolute na ang mga developed countries are from the northern part pero just mostly of them. Kasi included dito ang Australia and New Zealand sa Global North. Kasama rito ang North America, Europe, and northern part of Asia. While the Global South includes the South America, Africa, and southern part of Asia. Next, let's further explore naman the global north and global south. The global north is the group of highly industrialized and developed countries. Kasama rito ang mga nabanggit kanina like US, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. And in this group, it also includes of what we call as the G8. The G8 or the Group of Eight was a political forum of 8 highly industrialized countries that met annually to discuss global issues with primary focus on economic and social problems. Now, there are 3 key points about the global north. First, the geographical. In geographical, it encompasses Western, First World, and part of Second World regions. For an example, the European Union, countries like France, Germany, and the UK are geographically located in the global north and historically considered part of the First World, shaping global economic and political systems. Second is that the global north countries have an affluent and developed economy. It's 1/4 of population controls the global income and owns about 90% of manufacturing firms. For an example, the United States has a small population share but has a huge wealth and home to major corporations like Apple and Microsoft. And lastly, the services. In the global north countries, 95% of population has access to adequate food and shelter. For an example, in the case of Canada, Canada has a strong welfare system that ensures basic needs for nearly all citizens. To summarize, the global north refers to developed regions like the US, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, including the G8 countries. It is defined by 3 key points. First, geographical, mainly Western and First World regions. Economic, wealthy and industrialized, controlling most global income and companies. And lastly, the services or social, most people have access to food and shelter. Now let's learn about the Global South. The Global South is the group of underdeveloped and economically disadvantaged nations. This group comprises regions like Africa, Latin America, developing Asia, and the Middle East, aligning now with the terms Third World and less developed countries. Just like the Global North earlier, there are 3 key points about the Global South. First, in economic, Global South nations has reliance on primary product export. It has a limited share of global income and colonial legacy shaping disparities. For an example, in Nigeria, economy depends heavily on crude oil exports while much of the population remains in poverty, reflecting colonial era resource dependence. Second is political. Global South has a struggles with political instability. For an example, in Venezuela, political crisis and contested leadership have fueled hyperinflation and weakened governance. And lastly, the services in the Global South countries has a limited access to technology, inequalities in living standard, life expectancy, and resources. For an example, in Haiti, they struggled with inadequate technology, widespread poverty, and low life expectancy compared to global north nations. In summary, in economic, it has a reliant on primary export with limited incomes. In political, frequent instability and weak governance. And services, it has a limited access to technology and lower living standards. And unfortunately, no, these aspects are felt and evident to the Philippines. Economically, we rely on primary export like agricultural products and overseas remittances. Politically, we face challenges in governance and corruption. Yung flood control projects, lately, di ba? It is reportedly na bilyong kaban ng bayan ang naibulsa. And in services naman, well, we have a progress has been made. Issues like poverty, unequal access to healthcare, and gaps in technology remains evident. Now, let's dive naman into its importance in the international to grassroots level. Now, why is it important? This divide has a different effects from international stage into our daily lives. And in this division, Global North influences global policies. The Global North often sets the rules while the Global South is more often a recipient. For an example, on the case of climate change, the Global North pushes for carbon reduction while Global South countries like the Philippines suffer stronger typhoons despite contributing less to emissions. 'Di ba? Hindi ba't ang unfair for us developing countries na nire-require na mag-put ng same effort with the developed ones after nila magpayaman and mostly may malaking contribution sa climate change? Hindi ba't ang unfair naman nun? I will let you ponder on that case. Next is the trade and finance. The US and EU dominate the World Trade Organization rules while the Philippines depend still on export like bananas and electronics and loans from international banks, which later on affects the economy of our country. And on the grassroots level naman or everyday life effects, in the global supply chains, the Philippines as part of Global South provides labor in factories while raw materials, technology, and brands often come from the Global North. This reflects how the South produces goods at low cost while the North controls design, capital, and profits. And in the migration patterns, many Filipinos migrate to wealthier Global North and Middle East countries for work. Their remittances sustain families back home, showing how economic inequalities pushes south to north labor movement. And understanding this connection and division allows us to see globalization more clearly, not as equal participation, but as a system marked by imbalance and interdependence. Before we proceed to the next topic of this lesson, I would like you to ponder on this question. What are the effects of this division that you felt and is evident in your everyday life? And does it benefit you or not?
The Three Worlds model is a framework for categorizing countries based on economic and political development, originally proposed by French demographer Alfred Sauvy in 1952. It has evolved over time with modern interpretations focusing on economic development rather than Cold War era political blocs.
When we hear the terms First World, Second World, and Third World, ang unang pumapasok sa isip natin ay ito yung mga developed countries, developing, and yung underdeveloped countries. But in realities, these categories did not start that way kasi nga they were born during the Cold War, wherein the time when the world has split between two major powers, the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Unions with its communist bloc. So, ito na nga yun. Countries that did not side with either were called Third World. Habang lumilipas ang panahon, the original meaning is nagbabago na din, and the term slowly turned into labels about health development and global inequality. And this is where all it gets interesting, kasi nga hanggang ngayon these terms are still affecting how we see nations and how they are treated in international relation. So dito sa first world, this is often seen as the winners of development. Kumbaga sila yung top class, ganon. Because they are highly industrialized nation and with strong economies, stable democracies, and high standards of living. If you think of countries just like United States, Japan, or Germany, makikita mo yung image of world class. Kasi nga, meron sila mga advanced technologies, they have a strong institution, and opportunities for their people. For me, this often treats them as model of liberal democracy and economic growth also. But here's the catch. Kasi, like being first world countries doesn't mean na they are very perfect and wala silang iniisip na problema, ganun. But even because of their advanced societies, is nagkakaroon pa rin sila ng problem, just like inequalities, environmental issues, political polarization, and still compared to others, they hold the most influence in shaping global system, just like trade, finance, and security. Kung merong first world countries and developed countries, is meron namang second world, which is ito yung developing countries. This second world is more complicated kasi originally it was just the communist bloc led by the Soviet Union. Pero ngayon, when people say second world, they usually mean emerging economies, countries that are in between. Yun nga, nasa palagitnaan. Not fully developed, but not poor either. Nations like Brazil, Vietnam, or even part of Eastern Europe fit this description kasi nga they are growing fast, they are modernizing, and try to catch up with the first world, but they also struggle with inequality, corruption, and unstable governance. In this way, they represent the middle class of the international community, like pushing forward but still dealing with setbacks. So, yun lamang po. Now, mapunta naman tayo dito sa third world country, which is this is the most understood identity, which is back in the Cold War. These countries meant that were neutral or part of the non-alliance movement, like India, Indonesia, or Egypt. But over time, this phrase became a shorthand for poverty, underdevelopment, and instability. And ngayon, nowadays, scholars actually avoid the terms because kasi nga, it feels like too loaded and even degrading. Instead, we use the term like developing nations or global south. These countries with weaker economies, low human development index scores, and ongoing struggle with healthcare, education, and political stability. But here's an important thing to remember, like being in the third world is hindi nagkakahulugan na mahina or internally weak sila. But sinasabi ng ibang theories like the Medici theory, they argue that their situation is also caused by unfair global structure that favors richer nations. Like, ibig sabihin kasi nito, hindi lang sila basta mahirap, kundi biktima rin sila kasi ng global inequality. So, why this still matters today? Because nga, even though the Cold War is over, the legacy of these labels is lives on. For example, just like the COVID-19 pandemic is it showed us how unequal the system is. Like first world countries, they are hoard dead vaccines and recovered faster, while many developing nations were left behind na din kasi. Like, these categories may not always be accurate, pero nga, they still shape the way countries are viewed and treated. That's why political scientists push for more precise terms and measurement, just like HDI or income brackets rather than outdated labels. So, yun. Pero in the end kasi, the term first and second, third world are just a neutral description lamang. They are a reflection of history, power, and inequality. So, for me, our job is to question them, understand where they come from, and think of better ways to explain the realities of our global society. Kasi, kung hindi natin re-examine ang mga konseptong ito, we're seeing the world in black and white categories, when in truth, the global system is way more complex than that.
Ngayon, pag-usapan natin ang Asian regionalism. Ano nga ba ang Asian regionalism? Asian regionalism focuses on the relationship between ideas and politics and examines rapid growth of Asia's economy, financial stability, and regional economic integration. Ang pag-unlad ng Asya ay nagkakaroon ng malaki at positibong epekto sa buhay ng mga tao. Karamihan sa mga ekonomiya sa Asya ay gumawa ng kapansin-pansing pag-unlad sa pagbawas ng kahirapan. I will discuss the factors that have driven and enhances the integration of Asian regions. This integration is important for fostering economic growth, stability, and collaboration among nations. So, integration is the act of bringing together the smaller components into a single system that function one. Sa prosesong ito, ang mga individual na bahagi ay pinagsama-sama upang makalikha ng mas malawak at mas epektibong sistema. Ang layunin nito ay upang mapabuti ang pagganap at pag-andar ng kabuuan sa pamamagitan ng pagkakaroon ng mas mahusay na ugnayan at kooperasyon sa pagitan ng mga bahagi. First is the removing of trade barriers. The elimination of tariff and quotas has significantly increased trade flows between Asian countries. This has led to a more competitive market, benefiting consumers with lower prices and more choices. It enhances trade relationships, have also encouraged foreign investment, further stimulating economic development. For example, the ASEAN Free Trade Area that established in 1992. It aims to reduce tariff and eliminate trade barriers among member countries. This has led to increased interregional trade, allowing countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand to trade more freely with one another, boosting their economy. Second, facilitation of labor, goods, and capital movements. A streamlined process for movement of labor have allowed for a more flexible workforce across borders. The free flow of goods has enabled countries to specialize in their strength, leading to increased efficiency and productivity. Capital movements have been facilitated through regional financial agreements, promoting investment opportunities and economic stability. ASEAN Economic Community aims to create a single market and production base. It facilitates the movement of skilled labor across member states, allowing professionals such as engineers and healthcare workers to work in different ASEAN countries without excessive restrictions. This enhances regional collaboration and addresses labor shortage and specific sectors.
Okay, so now we'll move on to conflict mitigation on bakit nga ba ito isang crucial driving factor for regional integration in Asia. Of course, primarily by creating a stable environment through dialogue and cooperation. So, conflict mitigation, isa yan sa napaka-importanteng aspect, no? For us to be integrated around the world. By this, we have organizations like ASEAN that use principles such as the non-interference and consensus to build trust among diverse nations. We also have the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia that provides a framework for peaceful dispute resolution, preventing conflicts from escalating. Now, how does peaceful conflict resolution fosters economic and political integration? Of course, we have several ways. Some of these are, first, it attracts investment. Of course, a stable region is more appealing to investors, boosting economic growth and creating interconnected supply chains. Yan ang first, attracts investment. Second, it builds trust. Platforms for dialogue reduce suspicion, allowing for the negotiation of significant economic agreements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Of course, if we can mitigate conflicts, we build trust, which opens platforms for negotiation, for agreements like that. And of course, lastly, it promotes interdependence. As countries become more reliant on each other through trade and shared projects, the costs of conflict increase, reinforcing a cycle of peace and prosperity. So, of course, we are becoming more reliant on each other because there are products that we have, there are projects that they thought of na hindi natin naisip. Through this, we can share, we can agree into a more peaceful and prosperity. May prosperity siya. Okay, so we're now done with conflict mitigation. We will move on to the unified regional stances. Of course, this is of course related pa rin sa conflict mitigation. This is where it serves as a driving and enhancing factor for Asian regional integration by amplifying the collective voice of the region and fostering a sense of shared identity and purpose. So paano nga ba nadadrive ng unified stances ang integration ng Asian region? First, it boosts collective influence. By adopting common position on issues like trade, security, or climate change, Asian regions can negotiate more effectively with external powers, such as the US or China. This collective strength, for example, has allowed ASEAN to play a central role in regional security dialogues like the ASEAN Regional Forum. That's one way of how unified stances drive integration. Second is, it strengthens internal cohesion. The process of reaching a unified stance forces members to communicate, compromise, and find common ground. This builds trust and strengthens the institutional bonds necessary for deeper economic and political integration. The ASEAN Way, with its emphasis on consensus, is a prime example of this principle in action. Third, like how this is also part of the conflict mitigation, it also attracts foreign investment. A unified front signals stability and predictability to the global market. When a region speaks with one voice and on economic policies or standards, it reduces uncertainty for international businesses, encouraging foreign direct investment and facilitating the creation of regional supply chains. Of course, kung ikaw naman mismo, 'di ba, kung ikaw ang investor, would you rather invest in a ununified region than to invest in a unified one? Of course, mas pipiliin mo ang unified because of the stability and the predictability of it. Next is it facilitates joint action. Unified stances are essential for implementing large-scale, cross-border projects. For example, a shared position on maritime law or infrastructure development helps pave the way for collaborative initiatives like the development of the Trans-Asian Railway Network or the creation of free trade areas. Of course, if a region is unified, it facilitates joint action. Mas mapapadali ang pagdi-decide or decision making sa mga projects na sa mga border projects, right, or sa mga large scale projects na can benefit both regions or multiple regions. So that's it for the factors or that's it for the driving and enhancing factors, no, for the integration of Asian regions around the world.
So, after looking at everything about the North-South divide, it's clear that this isn't just a simple line on a map. It's a socio-economic and political division showing the big gap in wealth, power, and development around the world. We also saw how the Brand Line divides the world into the global north, those highly developed countries with more political influence, and the global south, which still faces challenges like poverty and lack of infrastructure. Many of the northern countries were former colonial powers, which partly explains their dominance today. This division affects international relations a lot. How the global north sets the rules for trade, climate, and finance, while the south usually follows. It also impacts our daily lives, from the products we use to how people move around the world. That's why it's important to understand the North-South divide. It helps us see the real complexities of globalization, why the benefits aren't shared equally, and how we can work together to close this gap. Thanks for tuning in. Let's keep thinking about ways to create a fairer and more connected world.